All right, everybody, so let's try and find a seat so we could get rolling here. We have a lot of information to cover tonight, and I want to make sure that we give everybody enough time for questions and or comments for staff this evening. So as we have folks still settling in and getting some food, feel free to take your time. My name is Julie Mollica, and I am your Ward 3 representative. My counterpart, Catherine Goff, is ill tonight, so I'm running the show. So please feel free to always reach out to her or myself if you guys have any questions or concerns or any follow-up discussion from tonight's meeting. I do want to do a couple introductions before we get to our main event. We do have several staff members in this room. I'm going to do my best. I think I got most people. If I miss you, staff, I'm sorry. Let's see here. So we have Diana Wilson, who's our Director of Communications. She's our technician for the evening. Yes. Why can't I hear you? Okay, and then so we have Rupa Venkatesh, who's assistant to the city manager. Whoop, whoop. We have Amanda Peterson in the room. Thank you, Amanda. She is the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. We have Chief May right over here. We have Deputy Chief Randall Darlin over here. We have Jessica Hulse, who's our Crisis Response Unit Program Manager. I have a couple other staff. What would you like? Renee Lair, thank you, with the police department. And we have some other officers who are hanging out with us as well. Feel free to help yourself to food as the night goes on. So that's why they're hanging out, and that's great. So first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. You know, I think that this is a really important conversation that we're going to have as a community, and it starts tonight with Ward 3. So we're happy to kick off this great conversation. And then moving forward, I guess I do have one announcement that I need to tell everybody. So on our meeting that took place on Monday, I did announce that I will be leaving my seat as of April 21st. So my family is relocating to Thornton. We originally bought our Northland home right out of graduate school. It was a great starter home. We now have 3 kids, and our house is very, very tight. And so we're growing as a family, and unfortunately, that does mean that we have to leave. And so I'm really brokenhearted. I know that, you know, I've made a lot of connections with several of you guys, so I'll miss you. You know, just know that I know that you guys are going to be in great hands. Catherine has been an amazing leader, and the rest of City Council, right, is just fantastic overall. We have our mayor, Meredith Leidy, here as well this evening, and I know that she's going to do a great job at continuing to lead the city in the right direction. So I wanted to make that announcement just so that all of you guys are aware of how I will be transitioning over the next couple months. So, all right, I think let's kick it off to the main event. We're going to start off with Chief May and Deputy Chief Randall Darlin to come and kick off your presentation. Well, one of you guys have to hold that, and then someone else can talk in that mic.
Well, good evening. Actually, I recognize a lot of faces in here, so thank you so much for coming tonight. If you didn't see Monday's meeting, I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Chief Darling because I talk way too much, and you guys have timelines that we have to. I think I had them there till almost 11 o'clock, didn't I? So I won't do that to you, I promise. So, but we do have a lot of information. Please, you know, get those questions ready for us, and we can answer those. But it's been over the last couple of years. It's great having you guys here in person, so we're not those virtual meetings. So that's really important. Again, I recognize many of you, but if I haven't, I'll come up to you later and introduce myself. I've been a chief here in Northland since 2011, but I started my career here in Northland back in the early 90s. So I've been a part of this community. Some of you remember me on the bicycle way back in the mid 90s. So I need to get back on that bicycle. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to my Deputy Chief, Randy Darling. Again, don't hold it against him. He came from Chicago PD. He was a deputy chief out there. So if you have problems understanding him, I can interpret. Okay.
I'll use this one. Good evening, everybody. My name's Randy Darling. I'm the deputy chief here. I've been here just under a year. June will be a year. June 1st will be a year. Really enjoying my time here. I really kind of made this transition out here for just this reason, right? I want to have more of an impact with the community, and there's more of an opportunity here to do that than there was in Chicago. Just very large scale, back down to a much more manageable scale that's in Northland. I want to start off our public safety presentation. Next slide. And basically, this is just designed to address the concerns of the community with crime in Northland, right? And we're going to tell you, we got lots of statistics in our presentation. We don't want to overwhelm you with statistics. We just want to give you kind of an overview of what's going on in the community, what's going on crime-wise in Northland, and provide you with some statistics, some details, and then get questions from you about what your concerns are and how we can serve you even better. All right? So I want to talk, next slide. I want to talk about how crime is reported in Northland, right? So how we compare crime between communities and across the country. Crime statistics in Northland, every crime category highlighted in this presentation are based on National Incident Based Reporting System. It's called NIBRS. The Colorado Bureau of Investigations uses this reporting system to allow Colorado agencies to report and compare crime consistently across jurisdictions. And the purpose of this is really a best practice nationwide. That's the purpose of it. We utilize this system not only in Northland, but generally in Colorado as a whole, so we can compare crime between communities, but also so we get very consistent reporting of crime from every community within Colorado and really across the country. This system provides greater specificity. It allows us to collect more detailed information, and really it allows us to do comparisons with victims and offenders. We can tell whether we collect data on whether or not a crime is related to drug activity, whether it's related to gang activity, what relationship the offender has to the victim, whether it's a known associate, a friend, a family member, or a stranger. But we collect that data so that we can better review crime. And then this gives us a much greater opportunity to do more analytics, more flexibility in how we analyze crime, how we use that data to better serve the community and use that to identify hotspots in the community and how we can use that information and data to drive our resource allocation. Next slide. So we'll get right to the crime statistics.
1 second, Chief. I'm trying to get like when your slide shows, see everybody on the side, and I haven't been able to figure out how to get it off. 1 second. All right, so we're sharing the screen, and then people go to the side. I don't want them over there. All right. Here's the next slide.
All right. Can someone see if they can grab Chris real quick just to help us out on this? So here's our crime statistics as a whole in Northland. It's tough to see your offenses up there. So the top slide says assault. That's what you're missing right there. This is assault up here. Across the board, our 2021 numbers, 2020 numbers, a 5-year average, which we utilize to provide really context, right? It's a long period of time to look at averages. So that's what we do with that 5-year average. And then the 2021 is a comparison to 2021 crime as compared to that 5-year average. So when you're looking at these numbers, here's where crime is up in Northland: assaults, weapons violations, motor vehicle theft, and theft of motor vehicle parts. That is driving the bulk of the crime in Northland. Assaults are very common incidents, right? It's some conflict with somebody. There's some type of a contact, assault, striking, hitting between two people. That includes domestic violence. That includes all assaults of all kinds. And for 2021, we have 70 more assaults than we did in 2020. When you look at it compared to a 5-year average, we're up about 29.6% in assaults in general. When you look at weapons violations for the current year, 2021, or the past year, 75. That was +9. We were up 9 from 2020, Well, we've seen about a 47% increase in weapons offenses as related to the 5-year average for that crime in Northland. When you look at those numbers, those are striking numbers. Weapons offenses are all weapons. It's not firearms specifically. It's all weapons. It's a knife, it's a bat, it's a bludgeon. It's using that weapon in some type of an offense, okay? Motor... There we go. Nice. Motor vehicle thefts. This is one of the highest increases that we're seeing in Northland. We're up 126 from last year, so 126 more vehicles stolen in 2021 versus 2020. And over the 5-year average, we're up about 48.5%. So we're seeing this. And these crimes that I'm talking to you about today, we're seeing these same type of increases across the metro area. So this is not indicative of Northland specific. These crimes are across the entire metro area. Motor vehicle thefts are higher in Colorado than any other state in the United States. All right, so it's a sharp increase, but we're seeing it across all the communities in the Colorado and specifically metro area. And the last one is theft of motor vehicle parts. You're seeing a pretty strong increase there. You see 121% over the 5-year average. That is almost being exclusively driven by catalytic converter theft. And if you don't know what a catalytic converter is, it's a part on your muffler system, on your car. Thieves in the dead of the night work as crews. They come out, they use a Sawzall battery-operated saw. They get under your car, they chop it out. It takes minutes. It's literally minutes. And they take these products to scrap yards, and there are 2 types of metals in there that are valuable. And thieves can get, anywhere from a couple $100, $50 to a couple $100 for these catalytic converters. So there's a value there, and it's a very quick crime done generally in the dead of night. The only indication is that noise the Sawzall makes for about a minute. It takes them to get through that metal to get that piece of equipment off the car. So with regard to our calls for service, I wanted to touch on one thing here, and that's shots fired. You can see up here, this is a calls for service, not a crime report. 246 calls for service of shots fired. It's a small increase over last year, about 20 more calls than last year, and it's about a 39% increase over the last average for the last 5 years. Calls of shots fired, obviously a huge community concern, right? If you hear about shots fired in your neighborhood, it makes you nervous. It makes you concerned for traveling in and around your community. Now, the piece here I want to stress most on this particular data point is that the 246 calls for service roughly turns out to be about 10, we've had about 10 people, about 8 to 10 people in Northland shot at any point during any single year for the last 10 or so years. We're not seeing real increases in individuals being shot. What we're seeing is individual calls for service of shots fired, gunshots in an area. 246 is not an indicator that that's a real number of the number of times somebody discharged a firearm within Northland. What it is an indicator of somebody calling 911 stating that they believe they heard what were gunshots in an area. Sometimes we have corroborative evidence, like maybe casings on the ground. Sometimes we have corroborative evidence in the fact that there was damage to someone's property, a car was shot, a house was shot, a building was struck, a fence was struck. But those incidents are reported so many different ways that the data points are not clean to just give you a raw number of the number of times a bullet struck an object within Northland. It's just a data point that's not collected really easily. But in general, these are our crime statistics. You're seeing that there's an increase in some of the levels of crime within Northland. I wanted to point out where it really is driven. It's assaults, motor vehicle thefts, and theft of motor vehicle parts. That's really what's driving our crime. When you look at burglary and robbery offenses, we're actually down over last year for burglary or for robbery offenses. We're up slightly, but over the 5-year average for burglary, we're down 1.5%. So the property crimes and other crimes are really staying flat. Where we're seeing our drive is in assaults, and a lot of that's driven through personal relationships between the individuals that are victim and offender, as well as domestically related. Next slide. So there's a couple contributing factors to this, right? Experts disagree on what causes crime. We've never had a consensus from experts on what drives crime in communities. But here are some of the things that pretty much unilaterally experts look at, and they can agree on these things. Economic hardship, social disruption. Those are two factors that are pretty seriously driving crime in communities across the country. When you look at what's been going on in the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic, that touches both of those factors very heavily, right? It's a huge social disruption. COVID was probably the largest social disruption that I've ever seen in my lifetime, and for many of you as well. And then the economic impacts that had with the community and with members of our community as well. Unemployment changes, change in work locations, moving people into the home for work locations, working remotely, utilizing different technologies to work. Jail population reductions was a big part of this, right? That was a big push when COVID first started was, hey, here's our very vulnerable populations. Incarcerated people were one of them. So they took that opportunity to try to remove jail population. So we released people out of the jails for that purpose. Multiple legal considerations were part of it, decriminalizing drug offenses. While this is a tool that's been utilized, not just in Colorado, but across the country, decriminalizing nonviolent offenses, it pulls people out of the criminal justice system. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't really affect the addiction crisis that really drives the crimes that are associated with the drug addiction, right? The crimes that are associated with drug addiction, stealing from cars, robberies, theft-related offenses, those offenses still are prevalent in drug-addicted individuals. So while we've taken away some of the legislative considerations in regard to criminalizing drug offenses, taking them out of the system, it hasn't addressed the real concern and the factors that drive crime, right? And then there's some prosecution issues, right? There's criminal justice reform. Our prosecution process has been held up for almost an entire 2 years. We have not prosecuted the number of people that would normally go through the system. That's keeping people on the street and out where there's not a lot of consequences for their actions. So small level crimes continue to rise across the country as a result of that. The cases are backlogged and there's significantly less consequences for the individual. Next slide. So I talked about a lot of this, but what I really want to talk about is the data shows the increase in crime conditions, not just locally, but nationwide. The pandemic has created that financial pressure. It's, pressures on household incomes. Those are those economic issues that are at play. And then multiple policy changes to the criminal justice system are all factors that are driving crime in Northland, in the state of Colorado, and pretty much every community across the country. With that, we've talked a little bit about the drug addiction, but overdose, right? The fentanyl issues that we're dealing with right now, 108 overdose calls for service last year. That was versus 74 in 2020. It's a 45% increase just in the 1 year process. So we're seeing those addiction issues continue to roll through that COVID pandemic and through that process. Mental health issues. We have an increased need for mental health treatment and services, but what we're seeing is we actually have a decrease in services during a time we have an increase in need. And that's one of the issues that we're seeing to help us, that's helping to explain the drive-in, especially low-level crimes. And what I like to talk about here is your visibility of crime, right? Your disturbances, your people experiencing homelessness. Those individuals are visible. They're out in the public. That's a disturbance at a community store or a community park or somewhere within the community, and it's very visible. It's very easy for the public and the community to see. Moral offenses, urinating in public, defecating in public, troubling to see. But as people experiencing homelessness increases, as the mental health issues increase, we're seeing those increases in the community as well, right? It creates what really is a perception of high crime and of low quality of life. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's an increase in crime or that those individuals are truly increasing crime within the community. It's really a perception issue. And it's something that we're working to address through our crisis response unit. Jessica Hulse is here now, and she's doing just a fantastic job managing our winter housing program, as well as all the services that are being provided to the homeless. We're utilizing really kind of a regional approach through Adams County, and every different municipality's really got eyes on what's going on in Northland with this regard. I don't want to take Jessica's thunder, but she's doing a fantastic job on that process. Next slide. So here's some calls for service data. 45,353 calls for service in Northland for 2021. So it's up slightly from 2020. That would be expected. More people were home during the true period, the roughest period of COVID. So our calls for service have gone up in 2021 when we started to have more mobility. But we're down over the 5-year average by about 7.5%. But what that really amounts to is about 124 calls per day in Northland for service. And that's really where our focus is for our patrol division. That they're responding to community calls for service on whatever the problem is that individual is identifying as criminal conduct, right? It's a lot of calls, 41 calls per shift. When we break it up across the 3 shifts, it's a minimum of 40, basically around 41, usually a little bit higher in the afternoons into the early evening, a little bit lower overnight, but generally it's down to 41 calls. Steady, even though that's a 7.5% decrease, those are pretty steady calls for service numbers. Next slide. Traffic. This one usually raises the big red flag for us in our community meetings, right? It's our #1 complaint. You can see that in 2020, we had a strong reduction in traffic accidents. Well, because nobody was on the streets driving. So now you're seeing the increases back into 2021 where, 1,273 accidents. You can look at 2019, those accidents were much higher back in 2019 when I guess the world was normal, right? Traveling was normal. But we're seeing those increases as the world opens back up and we see more travel. 1,034 accidents, you wonder how that even happened during COVID. That happened because there were no speed limits during COVID, right? Like crazy highway traffic, right? We were having speeding issues everywhere because there just was no one on the roadway. There wasn't the infrastructure's built for lots of cars and there were no cars. So people picked up their speed and they were moving. But we're seeing that pick up. But what we're also seeing is that more traffic citations and municipal county summons than in the last 5 years, well over the 5-year average. So our officers and our traffic officers are out there trying to combat that as quickly as possible because we are seeing that uptick in the movement again, and we want to affect that, right? So we're going to look at adding officers to our traffic unit. We're trying to get to the 4 officers and all of them on motors. So we're training 2 new officers in the coming weeks on that process. And then we're also working with the Public Works Department to address traffic management in the city. And we're working with them on different technology that'll help us improve our intersection safety and our traffic plan for the community. Our top 5 accident locations, might as well get them out there. It's not a secret for anybody, right? It's 104th in Huron, 104th in Washington, 120th in Washington, 112th in Washington, and 120th in Claude. All our major intersections, right? And we share those intersections with another community in each one of them. So difficult issues, but our traffic management's working with them. We're working with those locations. They're all our highest speed limits in the community, going through our busiest intersections. No rocket science here needed to get to the results of this particular issue. Next slide. So here's the big question, right? And this is what the community really wants to know is, are there less police officers in Northland? And the answer is absolutely not. We absolutely maintain minimum staffing levels on all watches. We will not fall below a demanded level of service, right? And we make sure we work at that and use a lot of creative ways to do it. We'll utilize some level of overtime if necessary. We'll let officers adjust shifts. We'll manage it as best we can to make sure that we have that minimum staffing level out there at all time. The city council has been very supportive of the police with budgetary considerations. You can see that over 2018 to 2022, the budget has increased. We're increasing our full-time officers from 87 to 101. Well, that's not just officers, 87 full-time employees for the department to 101.5 full-time employees with the department. And 78 full sworn officers in 2022 with 23.5 professional staff. So we're trying to keep increasing those numbers to continue to service the community as we see indications that require more service. but we have challenges. This is not, COVID hasn't just affected, individuals. It's affected the community. It's affected our entire government. It's in fact affected everything that we do. And some of the challenges we've faced are COVID impacts, recruiting. Recruiting is really tough right now, right? Policing in the United States is tough. Anything that happens in the nation is really polarized and pushed out to any and every police department in the country. So recruiting as a whole, the turnover, that is not a misprint up there, folks. That's 29.5% of our department has turned over in the last 2 years. That's retirements. That's people who've left law enforcement, just left the profession. So that turnover is high, and that makes recruiting difficult because we're very competitive. And not just Northland is seeing that kind of turnover. That's the type of turnover you're seeing in police departments across the country. So we're very competitive for hiring the recruits. So we're working almost constantly to get to that level.
Do you have a percentage of how many of those officers go to another department?
It's not a lot. I don't have an exact number for you, but anecdotally, more retirements and more left the profession, and a handful have gone on to other agencies in the last couple of years. So currently, we're working to make sure we fill our staff. We've got an academy in April, we've got an academy in June or July, and we're working to fill those seats and fill those slots that we do have vacant. So let's jump to the next slide. We'll talk about what Northland's doing, right? So we're focused on meeting the needs of the community, and we're really working hard to continue the development and continue the organization through our strategic plan. We've been working on a strategic plan through that 360 assessment that was done a few years back, actually about a year back. And we're really focusing on four categories, right? We're working on the development of our own employees, really important to develop our officers in-house, really set the stage for what our expectations are, what our community expects of our officers, and really raise the level of training for the individual officers. And that takes time, right? It takes a period of time to get officers up to that high level of standard that the community demands. Our second focus is on implementing technology systems to support the officers. We'll talk about a few of those in a few slides, but that's a focus of ours, really focusing on how can we use technology to help us and help our officers serve the community better. And there's some pretty good tools out there, and we're working diligently to use them. We've implemented several of them in the last calendar year, and I'll talk about those. Our third real focus is on communications, right? And Renee is here in the group here today, and she's our PIO, and she really has a lot of opportunities to outreach to the community, and that is one of our big pieces. And these meetings are a start of that. We want to do this presentation at each one of the ward meetings, so we'll do this 4 times this year. But it's a really good opportunity for us to get a face-to-face, and if we need to use virtual methods as well, use those as well to get that outreach to the community, get that feedback. So that's what we're working on there. And our fourth one is recruitment. It's a very important aspect to policing. Turnover in law enforcement is high. Turnover right now is higher than I've ever seen it in my 28 plus years. And it's what we're working on with our strategic plan. So we have new efforts to build stronger ties with the community, and that's really focusing on training, increasing staffing levels, and it kind of evolving into that intelligence-led policing, which also falls back to that technology, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. Next slide. So the implementation of the recommendations from the 360 assessment, these are all best practices pretty much nationwide, and we're working to implement anything that was not already part of the Northland Police Department that really focuses on those 4 categories that I just talked about. We're implementing that plan strategically throughout the year. We have deadlines, dates, and goals, and we're working to try to get those pieces in place as we move through our process. We've already included some of this, right? The CCPP board, our CCPP community input, right? So we've got our community outreach through our alumni association, right? We've got our co-production policing board. This has been about a year now, right? We're right at the year mark right now for the CCPP. And we're working with that, and that's that community piece. That is your voice in actually what we're doing within the police department. We're working closely with them to identify different ways to bring the community into the department, into the organization, and have them really open up transparency so that you can see exactly how things are done within the department. New non-uniform crisis response unit, that's Jessica's team, right? We're working with them to try to develop not just a co-responder model, but also to address our people experiencing homelessness within our community, as well as the mental health calls. We want to minimize the time our officers have to spend on scene with someone that really isn't a criminal justice issue. It's a focus on this individual needs services. They need help that really the police can't provide them. There are services from other agencies, other governmental entities, private sector partnerships, but it's not a police requirement. They may need us for a moment. They may need us to respond to maybe quell a circumstance, but what that individual needs is really a mental health service and stuff the police can't provide. So we're working with that. And then our community partnerships, and that's our outreach to you, our CPAN members, our citizens academies, all the different ways we can outreach the community. Next slide. So back to what we really prioritize within the department, and that's really our focus on responding to calls for service. 50 some thousand, 45,000 I think it was. 45,000 for last year, right? And how we deploy those resources, our number one priority is answering the calls for service, right? That's what our patrol division does day in and day out. Taking reports for any kind of concerns that the community has and any kind of criminal element or criminal issues that occur, right? Increase and improve our technology. So this is that technology I was talking about. Body worn cameras. Anybody got one on? We're all inside, so we don't have them. Small camera sits right on our chest. Every one of our officers wears one anytime we're in public. Part of a mandate from the legislature, but I'll tell you that our officers love the cameras. They are such a great tool to document incidents, to really have an unbiased eye in the room during any police interaction. They're great for evidence recovery. They're a fantastic tool. We've just put a similar camera system that works seamlessly with it into our cars. So the cars now have in-car camera systems in them as well, and they work in conjunction with the body cameras. So now we have another perspective in the public when we're out patrolling. And in the technology inside of these cameras is just tremendous. There's automated license plate reader technology in the cameras. So as the cars are driving down the street, they're reading license plates. And those license plates are then compared against stolen license plates for the state of Colorado and for the nation on NCIC. So a car that's stolen out of Illinois that is traveling through Colorado, we can pick that up by reading the plates. So this technology, brand new, and we're working on that. And that not only does it give us instant information on maybe a suspect in that car that has a warrant or a subject or a car that's stolen, but it provides just information for investigative purposes as we move forward. That shots fired call I talked to you about earlier, those calls are being reported. Our cars are responding. None of those officers are coming from the same exact location. They're coming from different locations, and they're coordinating their response in. Well, we're getting license plate reads for every car we pass during that process. So it gives us an opportunity to go back and review those license plates and start to look for different opportunities for us to bring suspects forward in these crimes, and not just shots fired calls, but any call for service. So this technology, these technological advances are huge for the department, because an officer driving down the street can't run hundreds of plates, but these readers can, and they can run hundreds of plates for us. We're also working on our regional partnerships focused on reduction of auto thefts. Motor vehicle thefts are one of the biggest things we're seeing. We're joining CMAT, the Colorado, or the Metro Task Force for auto thefts. We're joining that this year. We're going to start in July. We're sending an investigator down to that unit, and that unit works on more longer term investigations on auto theft. Most people do not think about auto theft as a patterned crime, but it absolutely is a patterned crime. It is the same individuals that commit auto theft over and over and over again. So when we can build stronger cases that are longer term, they generally get much better prison sentences, and it takes the problem out of the community when we're able to use that type of a methodology rather than tying them to one stolen car. And then we're working with the city and businesses and residents on the crime prevention through environmental design. So that's, just, hey, where do we need lighting? Where can cameras help us? Do we have shrubbery that's providing cover for bad guys in and around businesses? Or is there, broken fences that are going to allow access and egress? So environmental design is an important aspect to what we do as far as how we can affect crime statistics and crime in our community. And we're working on that with government, the city, and our private sector businesses. Next slide. So here's a few things that are coming up now, and these are some of our focuses, right? Our community outreach, this is one of them. We want to make sure we're having these ward meetings and getting back in person with the community. And the outreach and education part of that, we're working with our City of Citizen Police Academy. That'll be back up April 6th, okay? Our NPD sponsored events, our National Night Out, and then our social media. We're utilizing social media as much as possible. We try not to flood social media because, again, not everybody wants to hear from the police every 5 seconds, but we want to have steady communication and meaningful communication with the community, and that's one of the ways we're doing that. We're working to hire a full-time crime analyst because right now, that's a split position. Our crime analyst and our PIO, she does double duty. And I talked to you a little bit earlier about intelligence-led policing. That crime analyst is a huge part of that intelligence-led policing. And intelligence-led policing is just the focus on really using our data within the community to identify things, to identify how we're going to disperse our resources. When we identify the data and use it in an operational way, we can be smarter with where our officers patrol. Based on crime reports, based on calls for service, based on all the different data points that we have, the crime analyst will help us identify those hotspots, and we can utilize that information to more accurately direct our officers. It seems like Northland's not that big, right? It's only 6.5 square miles of the main area. It seems like we should be able to be almost everywhere. It's just not realistic. But when you use data to drive where you're deploying resources, it's a very powerful tool in identifying and reducing crime. Increasing our traffic team back up to that 4 officers that I talked about earlier. We do have a considerable amount of traffic crashes in Northland, and we have traffic issues that need to be addressed. So that's a big part of our plan. Special enforcement team sounds impressive, right? It's really a focus on that data-driven stuff, right? We'll use our officers to focus on the data and deploy a set team of officers that aren't going to be responsible for responding to 911 calls, but are going to be responsible to focus on crime conditions that have already been reported and identified issues that the community has already identified and said, hey, we need some focus on this. And then developing pathways to communicate with our residents. And that is one of our biggest strategies in our strategic plan is how can we have better and stronger outreach with the community? The ward meetings are just a piece of it. Our social media parts are a piece of it. Our community events are a piece of it. But basically opening up as many lines of communication as we can. That's really the goal. Everybody in here learned of this meeting in different ways, right? You saw it in maybe communications through the council members. You saw it in Northland's magazine. You saw it in different ways. You saw it on social media. Some people saw it that way. We want to have as many means of communications with the community as we can so that we can open up that process even broader. Next slide. So what can the community do? And this is piece of that education, right? Did we jump a slide? I think we jumped one. Yeah, sorry. No? That's one slide ahead. You won't see the slide that I have in front of me. Yes, that's the one. Sorry. So really it's about being proactive, right? we have to have ways and find ways to educate the community to lessen their ability to become a victim of crime. We want to lessen that as much as we can. And that's get to know your neighbors. One of the best policing methods in the world is being a nosy neighbor. Know what's going on your block, right? Talk to the people on your block. Nosy neighbors scare criminals. If you're outside, if you're active, if you're engaged, and they were going to try to steal a bike off a porch or steal a bike out of a backyard, not as likely to happen. Nosy neighbors are the best defense against bad guys, all right? Join the Neighborhood Watch. Join the Citizens Police Academy. Learn how we do policing and learn how you can have a great relationship with the police department through our Citizens Police Academy. Let elected officials know, how important public safety is to you so that we're all working together. Sign up for Code Red. I can't stress this one enough. We just saw the Marshall fires run rapid through Louisville and Superior. I happen to reside in Louisville. I've only been here about 10 months, and I was not a part of Code Red. My wife did not get notified to leave. Thankfully, a nice neighbor of ours knocked on her door and said, hey, get in your car and get out because we're being evacuated. So your home phones, your landlines are automatically signed up for this, but your cell phones are not. Really look at signing up your cell phones for this service, right? It's not just a public safety service. It's not just public safety from the police perspective, but it's safety from fire, safety from, it's crime information, it's information. Information's powerful. So I can't stress enough Code Red. It helps us communicate with you in times of crisis. It helps us have a communication tool to you when there are concerns in and around your community, your immediate community. It provides us that opportunity to outreach to you. So please consider that, right? And then northglenn.org is a great way to just stay informed, not on just policing, but on the city in general. And the more informed you are on how we're processing the city as a whole, you'll understand what we're doing with the policing as well. And our page is right attached to that as well. And then, we want you to be our recruiters. If we have our whole community recruiting officers for us, it makes the job a lot easier. So when you see young people that want to be part of policing, send them our way. We almost always have a process open. It's not constant and it's not in every circumstance, but we'll take the communication and we'll have that outreach so that when we do open that process up, we can have officers outreach to them and say, hey, get in the line, get in here and sign up so that we can consider you to be a North Glen police officer. And what better way to have community stake in the community is then to have someone that grew up here, someone that is part of the community, to have them as part of our police department is a huge asset to us. And then this is really, really key. This last piece is social media is so prone to misinformation. And it's funny because I'm up here supporting social media, right? But it's also such a tool for misuse and misinformation. So really make NPD your official source of police information. We have a Twitter page. We have a Facebook page. And if you use that as official source for what's going on, you're going to get legitimate, confirmed information. And that's a huge piece because the more we get misinformation, great news travels fast. Awful news travels twice as fast, right? So we want really good information coming out to you, and we want to be able to give you accurate information. So please utilize that tool for yourselves with regard to real, live, timely information on what's going on in Northland. And when we do have crime reports, we're pretty quick at getting out information on what that is and how you can help. And something I didn't talk about, it was on one of the slides, but I must have skimmed right past it, is that environmental design. Really support security systems in your home. They've really come down in cost. So camera systems in and around your home, in and around businesses, we're really looking to try to increase that opportunity for the community because it really provides a lot of information. for the police when crime does occur, but it also is a very good deterrent for crime. If I've got to burglarize a garage, it's not going to be the one with 2 cameras on. All right, so that's a great way through environmental design and through cameras to really help protect yourself, but not only help protect yourself, protect the community. Because a lot of those Ring cameras and garage cameras and cameras on the porches, they capture the street as well. So they help us identify potential suspects when crime does occur. So from there, I'll open it up to questions.
I noticed that when we were talking about addiction, anybody, is there anybody tracking for alcohol? I mean, that's people. I bet there's nobody in this room whose life hasn't been touched by alcohol. It's huge.
We need to repeat your question, so like.
Yeah, the folks on, no, it's okay. The folks on the line can't hear the questions in this room because there's not a microphone to catch your voice. So how about, hold on one second. Don't.
Oh, in regards to the drugs, marijuana, and opioids that are being tracked, is there any tracking regarding alcohol and alcoholism? I mean, that's people, yeah, alcohol abuse, the shooting of the guns, that's drunk people sometimes. The domestic violence. I mean, alcohol is at the heart of a lot of the crimes that we're talking about. And during COVID, it was worse.
So I talked about specificity in the ability of NIBRS to record data, and it does record that data when we know that information. So when there's information available to us that drugs were part of a criminal conduct or alcohol was part of criminal conduct, then we'll collect that data through NIBRS. It's part of our case reporting process. So if that information is available, yes, we will have it, and we can use that information to identify issues and problems within the community. That data is more focused on not so much crime specifically, but on relationships to crime. So that data is used more for studies than it is for, crime analytics and how we're going to deploy resources, but it is captured in our crime reporting system. So we have a multitude of ways to get referrals to Jessica.
So the question was, how do we refer these cases to Jessica Holtz, who's our, what's your manager of crisis response unit? Thank you.
So we have a multitude of ways, and I'll actually just let Jessica answer that question, how we refer. We refer multiple ways. There's some through the department, there's some through our homelessness work, but there's a multitude of ways that we get to her.
So the crisis response unit takes referrals 4 different ways. First, through our police department, if they are identifying someone who's needing additional resources and utilizing 911 as a call. Oh, sorry, I forget this isn't an action.
Yeah, the mic's not, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the crisis response unit takes referrals 4 different ways. One is through our police department, and they refer cases who are generating high levels of 911 calls that are not rising to the levels of public safety or based in criminal acts. Second is through code enforcement. I won't get into that because that's not really touching on public safety. Third is through our municipal courts, and that's when someone's having a difficult time becoming court compliant. And the fourth, which is what we mainly work in right now, is with our self-referrals. So when a person in our community is struggling, sometimes with addiction, sometimes with mental health, most of the time with some kind of form of homelessness, then that's when we really get involved and start case managing that person and making sure they have access to resources that feel supportive to them.
Thank you, Jessica. Question in the back. Hold on one second.
The microphones don't actually project any sound except for the people online. The people online is where it's helping us.
If I heard you correctly, I think you said Colorado has the highest numbers of motor vehicle theft in the whole country.
That's
Are there
correct.
any identifying facts as to why that's happening?
So it's a new data point that's only been available for a very short period of time. They're working to identify, that's always one of the critical elements of when crime is reported is the why. There's no one factor for it. It's multifaceted. But we've seen this across the country. Motor vehicle thefts have really risen during this COVID pandemic. Sharply across the country. Colorado's seeing some of the sharpest increases. It's not a raw number. I assure you New York City and Chicago are having more auto thefts than the state of Colorado is because of population. But as a per capita number, it's higher in Colorado than anywhere else in the country. And I think some of the reasoning is that economic hardship, and vehicles are utilized in a variety of other crimes as well. So as you see crimes rise for any type of violence or robbery or other related crimes, those vehicles are used in those type of crimes as well.
All right, another question over here. Did you want to add?
Actually, I'll come and talk
Go to the mic.
or I'll get yelled at. That's one of the things why we're really pushing that community engagement and getting involved. Try to reduce those numbers. Currently, we're having a difficult time getting people still in jail and also in front of the courts, right? So I don't know if you heard, but Chief Payson down in Denver talked about how they had one case where they made 8 arrests on this individual for stealing cars, and she hasn't been in court once. So we're seeing that up here. There's such a backlog that Deputy Chief talked about. So where do we focus? Right now, it's very difficult to focus. Here's my crime prevention, community policing stuff that I'm going to talk about right now. And I get to draw it on the board. So anybody ever see the crime triangle? No? So on one side, you have the offender, right? This side, you have the location where that crime's occurring. Don't give me a hard time about my penmanship. And then on this side, you have the victim, but I'm going to also put in there our residents, right? The potential victims. Right now, the way that we used to impact this is that we would chase all those with warrants and make arrests and put them in the system so they go before the court. We make those arrests, put them in there. So if it is an addiction problem, like we were talking about earlier, that addiction, again, also correlates to some crimes that we're seeing, especially with fentanyl and the opioids and all that. They're stealing cars. They're doing criminal trespass to vehicles. They're cutting off your catalytic converters. So again, trying to get them in the system or get them in front of something has been very difficult for us. The city manager and I, we're going to go and meet with the district attorney next Monday, to talk about that process and how we can maybe better help that. But again, we're not putting as much into that offender side of the triangle. And if you impact that side of the triangle, it reduces crime, it takes crime away. The victim and resident, that's why education is so important. When you're warming up your car in the morning, don't leave it unattended, because we've had a ton of those cars stolen. Don't leave any of your property inside those cars. I've arrested kids in the past that they broke out a window for they saw some change in your cup holder, right? So they're going to do $300-400 worth of damage, just like the catalytic converters. Yeah, they're getting $50 to a couple $100 in metal, but that poor person that has to get it replaced is over $1,000, right? So again, there's going to be programs rolling out, and that education piece is so important. How you can identify or mark your catalytic converter, how you can, do that extra step. So when they look at your car, they might see a club in there or some other anti-theft device, where they pass your car up. So the more we get out in the community, the more classes you take with us in Assistant County, more crime prevention through environmental design. So the last one's location. How do you make your house unattractive to a criminal, right? That's better lighting. That's making sure, the camera system. And, there's that whistle. Have you ever seen that? We're walking by on the sidewalk and there's a whistle saying, "I see you." That's a camera system talking to you. That's a deterrent. And that's what we need to make sure that we're getting that and pushing that out. That's how we're going to reduce the numbers in Northland, right? So again, we do SEPTED. That's my community relations officers in the back, my training sergeant in the back. Renee does a lot of online training that we can do and to push that out to you guys. But getting involved, having a voice in our legislation, there's some things that hurt us, right? And I'll talk about one. One came into effect yesterday. So if you call me and you go, Jim, there's a guy breaking into my car. My officers are on it. They grab him, finding out he's a felon. They're patting him down. They have a couple ounces of methamphetamines in his pocket. They have, what else did I throw in? So criminal trespass to a car, which is now a misdemeanor, not a felony. The felon, oh, he has a gun. We end up patting him down, he has a gun. Right? So this is a felon with a gun, did a criminal trespass to your car, has some drugs on him, all misdemeanors. Cut him a summons and let him go. How's that going to make you feel? No. So these are some of the challenges that we're facing right now. So again, having a voice, when you see legislation that affects public safety, speak up, right? I think that's the best thing. I can tell you last year, Kyle Mollica, there was some stuff trying to be passed, and he called me and he goes, Jim, they're trying to get this passed. And he fought for us, and they downed it. And it was because of his voice and talking to some of the other senators to make sure, that didn't pass, because that would have adversely impacted. We had some things that get through, like that one, that took effect on the 1st. But again, just keep communicating. So we have to figure out ways how we can take that. So that person that's, does an ag motor vehicle theft, right, that carries a gun, I don't know, maybe needs protection, as he's stealing cars from some other people. So it's just absolutely frightening to me. Or the drug dealer, right? Oh yeah, felons, they need to carry guns. No. So again, that's some of the stuff that we're facing. We're seeing a lot, we're taking a lot more guns off the street. You can't tell, but I'm on my soapbox right now.
Yeah.
Well, you need to be on your soapbox with a microphone.
With the mic.
Am I driving Diana crazy? I am. It took them all coming in there. He's like, the chief's on a rampage. Watch out. So again, and that's why it's so important to have these meetings, and we're going to do this throughout the year. Please participate. Get a hold of Jeremy on the Citizens Academy. If you want us to come out and take a look at your house, to look at the lighting, look at the shrubs, look at your lock mechanisms on your doors, we can do that for you. So again, sorry for my rant. Thank you so much for coming in. I hope you have a lot of questions, and put the deputy chief on his spot right there.
Thank you, Chief. All right, so I know we have a couple hands in the crowd. I do want to ask a question that came in online. This is from Danny. Is there anything being done to address the drug/transient issues occurring in the Washington Point shopping mall area? So that's 120th Washington Safeway Arc area.
Okay, so the short answer, yes. We're working with the businesses in that area to, reduce the transient population. But just being in a location isn't criminal conduct. It's not criminal conduct to be high. It's not criminal conduct to be in a shopping center parking lot. So, yeah, so we work with our businesses, and most of the time, the businesses want to make sure that their area is clear. But again, the prosecution side of that isn't in effect right now. There's no way to affect that offender side of the triangle with that particular issue, especially if the conduct isn't criminal. So it's a difficult process, but yeah, we're working on moving the individuals, taking them out of the shopping center, asking them to move, and we have pretty good success with that. But it is not a foolproof process, right? Oftentimes the individuals leave for a short period of time and they come back. We trespass them out of the stores when we can. That'll give us an opportunity to write summons. That'll give us an opportunity to hold them accountable once we get them through the court system. But again, without that piece of accountability, we are struggling more with that than we have in the past. Yes.
So, there we go. Okay, so I know summer's coming, and so is road racing. Anytime the ice gets off the street. Okay.
Yes.
So I know that you guys have joined up with multiple areas, Westminster, Thornton, and a few others, to where you now have that website where if you are in a vehicle and you have a camera in your vehicle and you can videotape people road racing in front of you, you can actually report that through that website and they can capture it. I'd like to see you guys advertise that within the North Glen paper. But also, we've had a couple of nice days and the road racing's already starting, especially on I-25 from 120th down to 84th. There's the round trip track. Yes, all times. So what can you do? Can you put some cameras up there on the bridges that are going overhead? Can you do something to try and deter it more? Because I've gone out there in those times and there's not a state patrol officer or anybody to be found. So that's why these guys, and it's not kids either. It's amazing the age of some of the people that are in those road racing cars. They're in their 40s, they're in their 50s. No, racing the kids.
Yeah,
So the thing of it is what is being done or what can more be done to stop it?
So we are working with that task force. So we're putting resources into that task force. Our traffic officers are doing that road racing task force. And another piece that I've got working in the background right now is trying to put together some policies that could help us hold them accountable a little bit more through impoundment of vehicle process when we do capture that kind of conduct and we're able to interface it and interdict it on the highways. It's not just the highways, but one piece I want to talk about with this particular piece is the social media aspect to this. That's how they communicate. Social media is how they're identifying their locations. It's why we're seeing, 50 or 60 cars show up to one location. It's not a phone tree anymore. It's a quick Instagram post and all of a sudden we got 50 or 60 people. So if you guys see anything in that realm, we want that reported to the police immediately because we can interdict the locations a lot easier than we can interdict the actual conduct, because conduct's being conducted everywhere. We aren't going to chase these individuals via motor vehicle pursuit, right? We're not going to do that. That is a bigger public safety risk. We don't need to add to the safety risk that's already being generated. We are seeing levels of flight from the police like never before. 2019, we recorded 90 eludings of the police. 2020, 120 eludings. 2021, 198. We're seeing over 100% increase. They run from the police at every opportunity. And it's not just stolen cars. It's road racing. It's any offense because they know we're not going to pursue them. And we're not going to pursue them because it's a bigger public safety risk than it is to stop whatever low-level crime that's being committed. So it's a difficult process, but we are throwing more resources at that. We're working as a team. We're utilizing social media to coordinate our activities, and we're trying to identify those locations because when we can cut the locations off, that's very helpful for us, right? We can move that problem. We can start to break up that crowd. And when you break up that crowd, less opportunity to actually engage in the road race that was inevitable when we leave that crowd sitting. So a lot of different ways. As far as your specific question about cameras, we are working on some speed camera systems within Northland on the city streets, not so much on the highway. Chief, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's one big thing we're seeing. The technology is really.
Yep, really helping us.
I know that. I think the technology out there, that's one of the things, we talked about it. It's horrible when we let people go, right? We all, when I came on the job, we were still allowed to chase and, for auto theft and all that. But as time found it, but people were getting killed, because they don't care. The bad guy doesn't care and he'll run the wheels off that and run it into other people. So as law enforcement, it's like our purpose is public safety. So that's why we don't chase. So some of the other technologies that we can put in place, right? And when we do find racers, what do they do to their car? That's why they're so loud. They do the exhaust. So we can charge them for that. We can charge them for the illegal lighting that they do, the suspension. They drop their cars. We can, cite them for that. So when we catch them on that, in a parking lot where you guys probably have seen them over at Target or RTD Park and Ride down by Marketplace, or in the shopping center of the old Albertsons right there on Huron. So that's where they, load up and park. Our goal is to get in there quick, so we break them up. The task force is also very important, when we do the countywide task force. So there's a lot of things that we try to come at them on those racers. Yeah, but we'll just keep trying, and I think technology is going to solve a lot of our problems. The cameras and that, city manager said, hey, start looking at that. We can put it in the neighborhoods. And that's one thing. If you're seeing speeding in your neighborhoods, ask yourself, is that a speeding problem or a citizen problem, right? A speeding problem where it's a pattern of behavior for multiple drivers. Sometimes on your streets or anything else, you can identify the same knucklehead that keeps speeding down your street. If you start seeing that, try to get a plate. Then, they hate when we go over and knock on their door saying, hey, a lot of neighbors are complaining about your speeding, and then we can see that reducing. Don't speed in your own neighborhood, right? So, you got a question?
So Westminster, Thornton, Northland does not allow a vehicle to be registered that has an altered muffler system, correct? So if we call you with cars that are always in our neighborhood with altered mufflers that go out at 10 o'clock at night when Huron is open and that's all they do is race up and down Huron, what are you going to do?
So we can't, so I can, we can utilize any statute to summon, to issue citations and issue summons. That's not a concern. We can issue citations. We can't really affect whether or not a vehicle is registered. If the vehicle's not registered, that we can do, right? We can cite for a vehicle not being registered. Mhm. If they registered in a different community, yeah. Right. Yeah.
If they're driving down the street, we can tell it's an altered muffler. That's one of the tools we use to go after some of these races. We might not get them for speed, for expedition speed, because we're not seeing it, but we're hearing it, and that's something we can do.
7 days a week. I know this is like really high technology, but I've wondered why we couldn't park a police car at the old station to deter people from speeding on Community Center Drive. Because a lot of times it's not people that live on the street and it's become a secondary high utilization street. And, you know, I go 25. Well, they ride my bumper. And it's really bad sometimes. They can get up to like 50 miles an hour. And so just a car parked over there, I think would be a big deterrent.
So we're welcome to the suggestion and we'll consider that. It is a scarecrow type tactic and it'll have a short-term effect and we may be able to utilize that. Right. I think utilizing that technique in varied times of day and varied days a week could be a possible solution. So we'll look at that and see if that's something that we could work through.
One piece specific to Community Center Drive is we're working on the redevelopment of the Civic Center. So we have our phase 1 completed, which is the new recreation center, senior center, theater. So as part of the future redevelopment, we are going to be installing a traffic signal along Community Center Drive, just west of E.B. Raines Park. So we're currently in the process of identifying where specifically that's going to go. And then with the future redevelopment, what additional traffic signalization or crosswalks we need to do along that road to really make sure we slow traffic down and that it's a safe roadway for not only motorists, but more importantly, pedestrians.
So what about late at night? Why can't you take traffic down to one lane, going each direction? So then they can't. I mean, at 10 o'clock, there's not much traffic on Huron other than drag racers. So if you take traffic down to one lane going north, one lane going south, takes away their ability to drag race. Especially in certain, like from 104 to 100, probably 128. Just put cones up and funnel everybody into one lane.
Yeah, it's certainly something we could talk about. We could certainly discuss those kind of options. There's a lot of infrastructure necessary to carry that out, right? And we can't just put out cone signage and barriers without some type of resource attached to that from the police department or from the city. So there are certainly costs associated with that we'd have to consider. Certainly something to talk about. I've actually used this strategy in Chicago very specifically. The resources that it took were tremendous because the resources that set that up are city resources. They weren't police department resources. We worked in a kind of a whole of government approach in that aspect. We saw some level of effectiveness for it. It wasn't wholly effective. It pushes the problem around. So we wouldn't have the ability to do that in multiple locations throughout Northland. It would be push the problem to Washington. It would push the problem to 120th. It would push the problem to Huron. We could maybe identify certain locations to do that, but it is a solution that may have some effect in the immediate area, would affect other areas in a negative way. So something to consider, something to work through the process on what that would look like. I've used it specifically in the way you're actually discussing. So it does have some validity as far as process, but it is, it's more of a whole of government approach to what we do, because the police wouldn't be out there with those cones and with those tools to do that. We would need help from Public Works and from, they're the ones that control some of that. Oh, sure. Sure.
So I do want to just maybe ask for maybe one or two more questions. Of course, Deputy Chief and Chief May will be around if people have additional questions and concerns they want to chat with after. We do have one more agenda item. I know, Amanda Peterson, you've been hanging out with me. So a couple questions.
I just want to ask a personal question, if it's all right.
Sure.
Are you glad to be here instead of in Chicago just now?
Super glad to be here. I spent 27 and a half years in Chicago. It's a very violent community. I have a lot of, great friends, and, I grew up in that area, but I did my time there, and I really wanted to look for a way to have more of an effect on crime and on a community specifically. And I think that I made the right decision coming out here to Northland, where, you see a community event like this, and there's lots of good discussion and lots of good points, and we have a way to really impact crime more meaningful. Chicago is so large, and even though it's broken down into pieces, those pieces are, 98,000 people in your ward instead of, so it's just such a grander scale, and I'm really excited to be here and work on a scale that I think is so much more manageable.
Well, we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. One last question on this particular topic. All right.
So with the new no pursuit for car racing, stuff like that, so does it have to be well, actually, that's one. I have two questions. Does it have to be a felony before you pursue somebody or not?
So what we really do is we really weigh every circumstance independently. There's policy procedure that we go through, and we weigh, we balance against public safety and all those decision-making processes. We look at it from a whole standpoint. And what we focus on is whether or not it's a person's crime versus a property crime, right? That's the first key piece of it. It's not the whole piece of it by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the first key piece of it. Is it worth it? Is it worth risk to the public, either from our own officers engaged in the pursuit or from the bad guy that we're pursuing to, chase that individual if they're willing to flee? And for person's crimes or violent crimes, or where the immediate need to apprehend this individual really outweighs the risk to the public, we'll engage in that pursuit when it's necessary. But we don't want to take a situation of a low-level crime, maybe street racing, maybe a stolen automobile, a property crime, and risk the family of four going through that intersection and getting crushed in a motor vehicle accident, seriously injured or even killed over what relates to a property crime. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and we really look at each individual independently. We have some hard prohibitions. We're not going to chase somebody down because they were speeding, but as a whole, it's a process to go through for our officers to identify when it's really a good idea to chase somebody and when it's not a great idea to chase somebody.
When I went through the Citizens Police Academy in 2019, and Officer Lund was the supervising officer. Did a great job too, by the way. He gave us a form to fill out if you wanted to ride along with an officer, which I never did it, but is it still available?
So during the COVID pandemic, we really restricted those ride-alongs. And as we continue to open up and some of those issues are lifted, we'll continue to open that program back up. But it'll be a process to go through. Same form, same process, but we're moving back into that as the COVID restrictions are lifted.
All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here this evening, and thank you for, you did great with all the questions. Okay, so we did have, I would like to welcome up Amanda Peterson. She's our Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. And then Rupa Venkatesh, if you want to come, or if we want to have Jessica Holtz answer any questions or give just a small update around the rec center, or you know, any the winter housing program or anything like that. Brief updates and questions if anybody has any. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Glad to get to see you for a bit tonight. And on a little bit of a lighter note, we are so excited. The new Recreation Center, Senior Center, and Theater has been open for about 4 months now. We are seeing some great use in that facility. We're seeing numbers that look about 20% higher than what we had seen in 2019 prior to the pandemic. Certainly we have a larger space, and as we continue to go through the, as the COVID pandemic continues and we continue to enter this recovery phase, we anticipate those to continue to increase. During the same time, we're ramping up our staffing. So as we opened the building, we hired some additional staff. And then as we entered 2022, we added additional staff. We just hired our new fitness coordinator. Her name is Sarah. So if you have been over at the facility or want to stop by, she's great. She'd be happy to show you around the weight room, talk a little bit about what your needs are for fitness. And she's assessing our current fitness schedule, adding to that. So you should see some great new offerings as we continue here through the spring and into the summer. Over the next couple of months, you're going to see our recreation guide, our summer recreation guide come out, and you'll see some old favorites return. So some things we haven't gotten to see for the last couple of years are going to be back. We have our family camp out in E.B. Raines Junior Memorial Park coming back. We have day camp and roving rec, although those have happened the last couple of years, they've been really different. So they're out on field trips again. They're going out into the community with those camp programs for our school-age children and our youth and teens. We have free nights at Kiwanis again this summer, so you'll see those return with 1 free night each month this summer. And we will have Mudapalooza, our mud volleyball tournament, out at Northwest Open Space. We've got our senior center, our NSO luncheons were virtual, then those moved into the recreation center in person, and now they're going to get to return to some restaurants this summer. So as we start to see those engagement opportunities and hopefully see, there's a few faces I've seen at those luncheons. And then we'll continue to provide some virtual options as well. We know everybody's not ready to go fully in person, so look for those virtual options for those of you who would like that alternative. Other exciting things, we are currently interviewing for a youth and teen recreation coordinator. That position is new for us. We haven't had that position in a while, so we're excited to be able to put that focus on our youth and teens in our community and be able to offer a higher level of programming. We're interviewing for that position, I believe on Monday those are scheduled. So should have that person on board a little later this spring. And then theater, if you haven't been in our new space, I brought a couple of copies of the current recreation guides. This is the one most of you probably already have in your mailbox, but if you need another copy, happy to share. If you haven't seen it in person, the sculpture that is on the front cover of this season's guide is amazing. So please come take a look at that in person. It really is kind of that identity and just this burst of color as you walk into the new lobby. That was paid for primarily through grant funding through the SCFD. So we're really proud to have that in our new space. Some of the theater programming taking place, we've got a really full schedule. If you haven't been in there yet, please check it out. We've got Family Theater Company in, Butterfly Effect, Theater of Colorado, the Colorado Jazz Orchestra, Colorado Symphony, traditional Indian dance groups. We've got our Northland Youth Theater back in full action for productions and classes. And then you'll start to see, we'll have summer concerts and summer movies out on our new festival lawn this summer. And then travel films throughout the course of the year. The staff have added a lunch component. So if you want to come for lunch or come for the travel film and then stay for a catered lunch, you can buy those tickets throughout the course of the year. You can do it as a one-off. Come check out one of those travel films, or you can buy a whole series. So we're excited to be open. We're excited to be offering new programming and looking forward to seeing all of you there. But if there's any questions we can answer about programming, about the facility, or any feedback that you have, we're happy to respond to that tonight.
Questions or comments?
Yes.
Oh, I'm
so
sorry. You're fine. Somebody wants a
need to, like,
Motown
hold my
group
hands up.
back. So
Yes, I learned today that we're bringing them back.
great. Awesome.
You were not the only one in those shoes, so we're excited.
Great. Any other questions or comments for Amanda? All right, so I'm going to invite, thank you so much for
I will
being here,
leave
Amanda.
these here on the table.
Yes, thank you so much. Meredith, you wanted to come up for a quick comments? Hi.
So I don't normally crash ward meetings, but I really wanted to take a minute and honor Councilmember Mullica for her service at this meeting. I don't know that everyone knows what she has done for our city, how she represents us with integrity. And I'm going to get emotional because I love her. She's so good. And I just don't know that everyone understands how well respected she is across the region, the work that she's done, how well that she's represented our city across the state, the metro area, the region. She represents you all the time. She listens to what you're saying. She has residents at the forefront, and it's a really big deal. So if you could just join me in thanking her, I think it'd be nice. And part two is she has really big shoes, but we need someone to fill them. And you're the people in Ward 3. So it will go out as an application process to just finish till the next election cycle. So it would be about 1.5 years of your time. It's an application, and I thought this would be a great place to recruit someone, because you are those engaged residents that understand our city, that read the connection, and that are really engaged. So if you want to step in and join our team for an 18-month stint and try it out, we would love to have you apply. So thanks again, and thank you again to Julie. I am sad she's leaving, but I'm so happy for her and her new home. So.
Oh, thank you so much, Meredith. All right, well, that concludes the agenda items that I had for this evening. So we do have staff that are going to be hanging around. So if you guys have questions, comments, thoughts that you want to share with anybody, please feel free. If you do have any questions for follow-up for me, my contact information is on the website. Also, you could just call me 720-365-7077 or email me at jmullica@northland.org. Of course, my counterpart, Catherine Goff, was not here this evening. She also helps me represent Ward 3 and will be also available for any questions or concerns. Final comment? Sure, yeah, if folks still want to stick around, I know we're way over time, I'm so sorry about that, but if folks still want to stick around and hear about what's going on with the old rec center, I could have Jessica, I'm assuming, come up and just give us a brief update and then take any questions.
If anyone wants to leave, I won't be offended. So my name's Jessica, as I introduced myself earlier. I have been a part of the winter housing program that's taking place at the old rec center. And if you aren't familiar with what this program is, it is a partnership between the city of Northland, who is hosting the program, Adams County, who is paying for the program, and Denver Rescue Mission, who is staffing the program. And this program is designed for people who are experiencing homelessness who also have an appropriate daytime use. Most importantly, work, also job trainings. Some people are engaged in high mental health needs. Some people are using the program to be able to reconnect with family members and grow those relationships. But the important thing is that everyone who stays there has a place that they are connected to during those daytime hours, because the winter housing program is open from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. So I just did a presentation on this the other night. So I have a couple of stats to update the community with. Besides those 20 residents that are allowed to stay there that have that connection to the daytime, there's also 5 spaces per night that are open to our police department in case they come across someone at nighttime that needs a place to go. So that emergency one-night shelter. They need to be escorted to the doors by a North Glen Police Department officer, and then they make the handoff to the Denver Rescue Mission staff there. So some quick updates. We opened December 15th. I have stats through February 15th, so the first 2 months. We have had a total of 65 participants, and that includes the numbers for both the full-time participants plus the police drop-offs. 39 have been full-time participants, 30 have been police drop-offs. That adds up to 69 because 4 of those participants are carryovers. They started out as emergency drop-offs, they were identified as able to use the program as a full participant, and they switched over to being a full participant. We have had 19 exits. 10 of those exits have been voluntary. 9 of those exits have been involuntary. I think that might be mixed up. The involuntary exits, most of those have been due to attendance because one of the rules and regulations is that you use the program every night. You cannot miss more than 2 nights in a row and then you are exited. So people who are working outside of the city of North Glen, it is difficult for them to get back and forth. We have one person who works for a waste management company. They need to be to work early in the morning. Sometimes they find a friend's house that they can crash on over next to where they work, and so they don't come back that night. Unfortunately, that means that they are then getting exited until they can recommit to the program. So that when people do leave the program, there is a pathway back because we always want to support people who are trying to move themselves forward. But we don't want to hold on to beds for people who are not using that space. For the voluntary exits, we have had one person become fully housed on their own. We have had one person move in with a friend. We do not know the status of that person. We have had a couple of people who work nights, so having a nighttime shelter does not work for that person, and a couple of people who they work outside of this area, so the location did not work for them. So with that, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Oh, one other important piece, we've had 0 calls for service regarding public safety. Through February 15th, we had 3 calls for service for 2 different individuals regarding medical concerns. We have had a couple more medical concerns through last week when it was really cold out, but again, still 0 calls for safety regarding the participants. And also we've had 0 calls for complaints from the surrounding community. So with that, I will take some questions if you have any.
You could use this mic, and if anybody has questions, I could bring the mic to you.
So I know that this is a new program, but 20 seems like such a small number. Is there talks of making more space or going longer than like December to March is not, I think it ends at the end of this month. I might be wrong.
So I'll answer the first part, which is regarding the number of beds. There's no talk of increasing the bed capacity because that goes along with our code here in North Glen, and that would have to go through a whole code change. Also, we are not finding, neither is Denver Rescue Mission, finding that we need an increase in beds. We are rarely at capacity, and that's because people are moving in and out as they need the service and then identify other places. So capacity has not been an issue for us, which is nice. Oh, again, everybody that uses the program as a full-time participant, they also receive weekly case management, and 2 of us do the case management for those clients. So that on top of our other case work, that would be not providing as quality of a service as we'd like to. And then everybody that gets dropped off by the police department, they are offered a case management session the morning after so we can help get them to where they need to be. 3 of those people have been stranded here in Colorado and ended up on our streets here in North Glen, and we were able to reunite them with family members across the country, which was pretty cool. Some of those people didn't have phones to get in contact with their family members, so that was pretty neat to see, actually.
So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rupa Venkatesh. I'm the assistant to the city manager. And I'm so glad you asked that question about if there's any talks about extending it past March 31st. So you all are the first group to hear this information before we start pushing out information to the rest of our community. So the reason why we had that March 31st hard deadline is because the old recreation center site is tied to the Civic Center master plan. So the timeline that we had with Continuum, which is our private partner, or our private, the developer that we've partnered with for that site, we thought that we were going to have an agreement in place with them by March 31st. But like everything else, it's been delayed. So we have the opportunity to extend the program. Again, this is probably going to be the last extension till August 31st. We just received word from the county today that they are willing to fully fund the program for another 5 months. But there is another step though. So council does want to hear from the public before they officially make that decision to extend it to August 31st. So we are having a meeting on March 17th at 6 p.m. at council chambers. It will be live streamed, but if you all want to come out, Jessica is going to do a more extensive presentation and show you all the numbers, and she's going to answer more questions. We've gotten a lot of questions about how to volunteer for the program, so she can go through that as well. But March 17th at 6 p.m. in council chambers, we do want to get public input. So y'all are the first to hear that. So thanks for that question.
All right, thank you so much for that update. Any other questions for Jessica before we adjourn? All right, I'm not seeing anything. You have anything online, Diana? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. There is a little bit more food. There's handouts and trinkets over here. If you didn't get one, there's chapstick. You know, that's always helpful. Again, thank you for coming. It's been the greatest honor to be able to serve you over the past a little over 4 years. So I wish you all the best of luck, and we'll see you around over the next couple months. Thank you.